Hi there, and welcome to another episode of Chat EbT. I'm your host, Mohammed Ebrahim Tayob. Now, today we have a very, very special guest. He's joining us all the way from the UK. He's the chairperson of AIX Capital. Father Yousuf, Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam.
Thank you so much for joining us, man. It's such a pleasure.
Oh, it's a pleasure.
Yeah. So, Yousuf, one of the topics that I love to cover on the show is, and I'm sorry for the viewers because you guys have heard this way too much, is the concept of pivoting in your career, right? Now, as I understand, you spent a good portion of your career in public service, and then you pivoted into opening up your investment fund. Tell us a little bit about that. Was there sort of like a change in principles, or what's the reason for that change?
Well, if I'm honest with you, Ibrahim, you always are what you always want to be. You just find different ways of reinterpreting yourself. So essentially, I was always a person who wanted to have social change due to the background and the experiences I had growing up. And social change meant government was an easy way for me to contribute to the country I live in and understand policies and systems which have been operating for hundreds of years. And modern civilization and the modern cities were really established from the British ecosystem. And I went to that fraternity to understand the basic principles. And eventually, as all migrants' children do, we want to be rewarded for our expertise. And what I found very quickly, you were making a lot of money for private sector businesses with social policy. And naturally, we want to get rich ourselves. So the idea was to be young, competent, and entrepreneurial with a skill set and an interest, which was always there. And I think being a migrant, their families and their children were always conditioned to service. Either a family member, either a neighbor, either a community member. It was a unique part of integration which added to British society. I think migrants brought the sense of service to the British culture, where we added value to communities. So naturally, it was embedded in us to serve others. But the trick was to monetize the service so that we could have private sector gain. And that's why I think the education system allowed me to do it.
And do you think, you mentioned that the immigrants were sort of, embedded with service, right? Do you think your venture into public service was more in the sense of creating that whole bit of representation as well?
So this is a very interesting topic for what's actually happening in my country right now. Immigration is seen as a negative and destructive and extremely toxic conversation for people who have historically contributed to the development of Great Britain. And historically, I've not had that experience. I'm a child of a minority. And the immigration that I experienced was one of community, was one of public service. It was in really intimate relationships at the grassroots level. I never had a problem growing up with immigration being a negative perception amongst British communities. The Britain that we see today that doesn't understand immigration is a failure with the leadership to identify the contributions immigrants make to any country. And I experienced my contribution to my country through the participation at the grassroots level in community. So service in the terms of benefiting your neighbor, your family, your friendship circle, your professional circle was innate from a migrant's DNA. And I think that combustion between host communities and migrant communities built a hybrid person which is in front of you right now. So we're locally relevant, but globally impactful, because we are what would represent the global citizen. And that's never happened before. And that's what brings me to your country and makes me instantly able to identify a common place to coexist.
No, very true. Now, as I mentioned, right, a big part of our show, we talk about pivoting a lot, right? And a lot of the time it's, people that might have felt a little bit trapped or stuck in their careers and, needed to have that exit. And so they went in a completely different direction. With yours, what was the reason for that change? What was the reason for going now into investment funds and, the decision rather to make that change?
So it's an interesting question because we came out of a generation where technology started to drive markets. So what we experienced was the rise of the internet, e-commerce, branded digital opportunities, and it was quick to make money. And when we come from humble beginnings, deprived communities, isolated culture, and huge potential, the only way to reward your capacity to contribute so that you can exist is to have a commercial model. And that's similar to what I experienced in South Africa. There's a huge push on raising awareness on deprivation. And believe it or not, we have very similar challenges in deprived parts of Great Britain than Africa experiences.
Yeah.
However, Africa gets the brunt of the PR campaign, which causes deprivation in a humanitarian crisis. But if I look at it from my lens, what I've experienced in South Africa in terms of poverty and deprivation is not too dissimilar when you look at the core themes in the United Kingdom. But the difference is the approach. We don't rely on short-term solutions for food, education, housing, or healthcare. We actually provide resources and education and opportunity. So you put seed in, and the seed carries sustainability. And that comes from a real self-empowerment of creating a perception of yourself. Are you competent? Are you capable? Do you have the values of hard work, resilience, patience? Are you willing to fail, stand up, learn, continue, and grow? These are basic principles which is taught in homes.
Yeah.
So the nuclear home, when it breaks, the young people are always the victims because they don't have a voice which can give them the opportunity to be heard. And that's the key message that I really want to make in your podcast today. Our institution and our organization was built upon hearing the voices of young people and responding with commercial resources and monetizing that need, because the commercial market is now younger and well educated and digitally connected to the global market. And we understand that. And that's why we invest in those key areas.
Now, speaking about your investment, or rather your investment strategy, right? And from my research that I've done about the fund, it's very heavily pushed that you guys are focused much more on principled investment, on ethical business investments. What's the inspiration behind that? What was the seed, using a nice little investment term there, right? The seed that sort of sprouted that investment strategy?
So business is about your personal expression to the market. Who are you as a person? What are your values as a human being? And ultimately, who are you accountable to? Myself, I'm a Muslim. My faith allows me to worship my Creator. I am accountable to Him. And my values are in order for me to demonstrate that to the wider public. So my faith I hold dearly to myself, but my human values are for the society I live in. And that allows me to see the industry from a different lens and perspective. Our morals and our values are not for sale. We don't sell regeneracy, and we don't sell the limitations of human capacity to progress. So for us, it was a real moral conundrum. Do we follow the market and make a lot of money, or do we follow the market and make a lot of impact? And we are very fortunate that post-pandemic, people started to understand the value of human life, about the outdoors, nature, exercise, being in a public environment where you could enrich your soul. This means something now. And we were very, very fortunate that our personal and religious values aligned with the market at the right time. And that allowed us to look at the market and find the gap. And the gap was people want to be happy, people want to feel confident, and people want to be active. So we went into investment in sports, into consumer markets where health and cosmetics were concerned, and then we went into talent development in terms of recruitment and human resources. So our investment in the modern era is about the people business.
And I love that because you struck a very good point there. You mentioned COVID, right? And obviously COVID was a very, very big game changer in all our lives. But I really agree with you there is that it also changed our mindset, or changed our perception, because here all of a sudden when you were on the go all the time, You know, you didn't really appreciate the aspect that, hey, I can go and take a walk outside without feeling that little bit of risk, you know, or I can spend time with my family and I can go visit my friends. But that's sort of all chinny, and that's what you're saying there, and I really appreciate that, is that we sort of needed to go in that people direction rather than just in a, oh yeah, this is a phenomenal area, we need to jump on that right now. No, very true.
Yeah, people are now in a market which you could become rich very quickly with very little social responsibility. The market is responding to fast money with very short lifespans in the marketplace. So we are trying to now build our brands and our relationships that have social impact. Ultimately, if your consumer has a benefit socially, emotion from your product or service, then your relationship with your consumer becomes one of a critical companion. So we're investing into the beneficiary relationship with consumers. And that gives us a long-term relationship from the consumer market life cycle. And I think transactional relationships are over. You can no longer sell a product. You have to sell a purpose.
Very true. Mentioning purpose, and earlier you mentioned youth. Now, I had I'm going to say the word privilege. I had the great privilege of hearing you speak yesterday at the Rasuli Center. And I must say, I thoroughly enjoyed your talk, not because I'm sitting in front of you, by the way, but I really loved the focus on the youth, because I think that is a big impact. And now you're mentioning creating relationships, essentially building foundations, right? And I noticed from your talk that a big part of that was around empowering the youth, right? Talk to us a little bit about that, where that mindset came from.
So it's actually a very simple principle of the Islamic faith. Our real success has been reinterpreting tradition of Islamic social impact in the modern era. And if you look at our beloved Prophet, peace be upon him, he actually invested heavily in the youth. Who then upheld his principles, his values, and his policies in order to benefit mankind and then bring people to a condition where they are socially and emotionally enlightened. So investing in the youth is not a new phenomenon.
Very true.
Invested in bikes and gold and shiny things is a new phenomenon. And when people of my faith forget to invest in their young people and invest in real estate and buildings and shiny things, they're taking it away from the development of that child. And sometimes you don't look at money as an investment. The most valuable thing we have in this life is time. And parents don't give time to their young people. And then they wonder why they are commercially and financially rich, but emotionally and personally bankrupt. And the result is in broken children, depressive children, isolated children who are living in their mind and lost every connection with what it means to be young, to have hope, to dream, to risk failure, fall in love with a passion, and go walk their own path. These children have been robbed of these qualities that make them children. And it's our purpose as peers and fathers or brothers to preserve the innocence of a child so that they can have the luxury to dream. And when you look at young people now, one of the crises that we have in the economy, young people have very poor skills. And that's something of real concern, because the next generation who inherits our achievements will not have the same aspirations or skills or emotional sensitivity to be aware of what's required for the generation they serve. So essentially, we serve the generation which is probably 8 to 15 right now.
It's very interesting you actually say that. I had a guest that was here a couple of weeks ago, and the big focus is this guest actually co-founded a company that is creating awareness around the problem that's been created with kids on tablets and devices and screens, let's call it screens, right? And one of the key points that she mentioned was very similar to what you're mentioning, is that the children are not learning, firstly, skills, as you mentioned, but also how to cope with issues, because now every time there's a problem, they just pick up a tablet or pick up a screen and get lost in that world. And adults are doing it as well. I know I do that, right? But I think the problem coming around is where we still had that time in our youth where we developed these skills when how to deal with something going wrong, how to overcome a certain challenge. This is the problem right now, is that people are not learning that part. You know, the technical skills, agree, it's there as well, but I think a lot of the social skills are getting lost in there, and how to deal with situations as they're coming up. Now, during your talk, I think you mentioned something where you were asking different youth where you think the problem is. And I think a lot of them probably mention, and probably a lot of parents mention the screens, right? Taking that into account, where do you feel things sort of started going wrong?
So this is a very sensitive
Yeah.
question to ask me, because if I answer it truly, then people have to take accountability. And I think in some shape or form, we all do it.
Yeah.
This whole issue is a failure of parenting. Children don't choose to hold a screen. Children don't know what a screen is. If you introduce it to them as a parent, you are now the perpetrator of their demise. And ultimately, this is a bitter pill to swallow, because parents think they have control over how they are developing their child. But the psychological and biological results of their actions is devastating. And we're just picking up the consequences of a generation of screens in front of children. So I blame the parents. I blame laziness. I blame lack of focus on the care of the children's development. If I see a child with a screen, do I think it's abuse? Yes, I do. Would I say it to the parent, why are you abusing your child with a screen? No, I wouldn't. But would I do it myself? No, I never would put a screen in front of a child. I'd rather pick up a bat or a ball and give time, take the child into nature, discover what a worm is, what an insect is, let them touch a butterfly, be afraid of a spider, have real human interaction with nature, develop those key skills of awareness, and enhance their senses, and give them the opportunity to look at the awe and wonder of the creation of life. But we choose to give an iPad because it's easier. And I think this is a failure of parenting. It's lazy, it's careless, and now it's become easy to hand a screen rather than make time.
Firstly, I agree with you. It is a bitter pill to swallow, but I actually fully agree with what you're saying. I mean, I've said it on the previous episode as well. I'm very, very guilty of this personally, and unfortunately, it is exactly what you're saying. It's, oh, you know what? We want to have a bit of a relaxing evenings. Let the kids watch the iPads, or let them sit in front of the TV or whatever. And unfortunately, that is a big part of the problem. And I fully agree with you. We parents need to take accountability for that.
If you look at the basic principles of the cycle of life, you're born, your parents serve you. You grow older, you serve your children, right? The battle between who serves who is a natural transition. So your careless behavior of serving your children because you're selfish for yourself is at the cost of that child's development. The minute you have a child, effectively your entire focus is on the development of that child, and your service to that child for 15 years is a priority. Not your career, not your happiness, not your social life. That child's development is in your care and your responsibility as a priority. Because once that emotion and development is broken at a tender age, it cannot be fixed.
No, fully agree with you. Here's the conundrum though, right? And like I said, fully agree with you, and it's something that we do need to fix. And I don't think that we are too far gone to fix the problem. Make no mistake, right? But it is quite a challenge. And I said this previously, is I think it needs more of a buy-in from us as parents, as adults. But unfortunately, it's going to also take a buy-in from the younger generation as well, right? How do we set ourselves in the right direction?
You see, children essentially, they want to have fun and be happy. It's not rocket science. So why not implement systems in your home that make your children happy and have fun? It's not hard. Do things with them. Be loving, compassionate, and
support your children's emotion development. It's not difficult. You were brought up in that way yourself. Have an extended support network amongst family. Bring in a social circle to enjoy with your children. How many kids go down the road and knock the door and play in the garden and enjoy their company just as kids? Allow the children to be children. And it's not difficult. You don't have to do too much. You actually have to do a lot less.
You know, as you're saying that, I'm smiling because I'm actually remembering a very fond sort of memory, right? And you said it a little bit earlier, is that unfortunately we associate success, monetary success, with successful parenting, right? And I remember we had, it was my son was very young at the time. And we had this weekly sort of get together with it was called, it was one of these groups. And they get together, they do activities with the kids. And, as parents, obviously we want to buy our kids all these newest toys and different things. And I think it was just after we went to a toy shop and spent fairly a good amount of money because toys are just very expensive. And in this class, the teacher took some rocks, put it in a little bottle, and my son had the blast of a time for like 30 minutes. And I'm thinking to myself, I just spent quite a bit of money, and he's sitting and having better fun with the rocks. And I think that's where it comes down to. Is I think, a lot of people, unfortunately, associate material things with success. When going back to that, we just need to let them be kids. We just need to let them explore, have that fun, make those mistakes. And I think that's a very important part that a lot of people, don't grasp, is that kids need to fall down. Kids need to make mistakes in order to develop these skills.
It's a really important consideration for the development of young people. We grew up with very minimal tools in our household to enjoy. Toys were a luxury.
Yeah.
But everything that we had was shared. You would knock a door of a neighbor and borrow their ball. And once you'd finish, you'd give it back. Essentially, we were taught how to be responsible and share and consume together. So nobody had their own. If somebody had something, it belonged to their social circle to share. So a strategy that would be really interesting is if you decided as 3 parents to share the resources for your children so they can develop the understanding of sympathy, sacrifice, sharing, enjoyment amongst themselves. And yes, there will be situations where they fall out as friends, but that's emotional development.
Yeah.
And allow them to be vulnerably exposed to failure and emotional pain, because it will assist them in their life to come, because life will be difficult. So train their emotional development to be able to develop capacity so they know how to navigate these emotions, so it doesn't lead into abject deprivation and mental health and isolation, and they suffer in silence with depression.
Very true. You spoke about something else in your talk, right? And I want to touch on it just a little bit. Is, we're speaking about very young kids now, but if we have to shift the focus to, a little bit of older teenagers, right? And I know this is happening in South Africa. I'm not so sure about the UK, and please elaborate, right? But I think one of the big issues we have right now is, and here's the thing, is I can't tell you whether it's youth not getting involved or elders not letting go of the reins, right? I think it's a balance between the two, to be honest. But you see a lot of the times, and I love what you mentioned on the mosque, not just being a 4-wall building where we go and pray our salah. It's supposed to be essentially a community center, right? And unfortunately, what's happened now is a lot of the mosques on the board or on the committees are mostly people that are over 40, over 50. But very rarely do we have 20-year-olds, 25-year-olds that understand the needs of the younger generation. So what do we need to do there?
Again, you're asking me a lot of controversial questions, and I'm going to probably upset a lot of people here, but I can only tell you my truth.
Yeah.
And I go back to traditional, authentic, orthodox Islamic principles when it looks at civilization and the development of community services. First and foremostly, a place of worship in Islam is a community service.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a place of worship in isolation to the devotion of the Creator. That's the anchor for bringing people together. It's probably the first ever center of community development to have ever existed.
Yep.
You come for God, and all your answers of your problems are resolved within that institution,
Mhm.
whether it be medical, financial, social, or spiritual. So this institution needs to extend to engaging with the problem of the generation you serve in that community. So Islam has always benefited historically from adapting to the needs of that particular community and making those resources available to understand the solutions in a culturally appropriate manner in a location at a given time, which will always change. And that's been a real unique attribute of our faith until modern times, where South Asian communities in particular confuse culture and tradition with Islamic responsibility to the communities they serve. And what happens then is you govern the places of worship in a cultural way because maybe you're afraid as a community of losing your cultural identity.
Mhm.
But once you enter Islam, I think culture takes a very back seat, and the priority is the faith. And your culture is limited to your identity as a Muslim. But when culture precedes religious obligation, you started to have an institution which becomes more like a temple from South Asia. And the difference was the masajid and the mosque in particular served real life problems. It never solved just the problems of an internal relationship with the creator, or else we are now no different than any other faith structure which serves people who come and leave after they do their worship. So the real issue is you really need youth engagement. Is there a youth committee? Is there a voice for young people to get together, take some ownership, and learn the key skills of management for community services? Are they able to have a voice? And one interesting observation I had, there were very old, tired, unhealthy men at the front of the masajid,
Very true.
and there were very cheeky, young, competent, and very, very capable young men hidden in the corner. So somebody's not feeling welcome to be a part of the front of the congregation. And that's a problem. That's a real problem because your future is at the back and your past is at the front. So who are we talking to?
Cannot agree with you more. Before we end, there's a question that I ask to all my guests, and you actually did give a little bit of an answer at the beginning here, but I'm going to ask you again. What message would you like people to take away from this interview today?
Wow. There's so much I could say right now. I would say one message is really important and it sort of cuts across all major issues within society in general. Young people are not a liability or a problem. They're an asset and they're the inheritors of everything you've ever contributed to in your life. And investment into young people is time, it's compassion, it's understanding, it's patience. And should you focus on giving these young people the opportunity to grow, they'll only benefit you. And I think that's the real strong message that I'd like to give.
Brilliant. Yousuf, I can't thank you enough. It's been such a pleasure getting to chat to you today. I would tell you that we're going to trouble you many more times on this chat show. So hopefully we're going to get some remote links going, or trouble you when you get back to South Africa. But thank you so much for taking the time for us today. I know you had a very busy schedule while you were here. Really appreciate it, and yeah, it was such a pleasure, man.
No, it was an absolute honor. And I think Africa, the people, the communities, the markets, and the opportunities for business are probably the best in the world. And it's been a privilege and it's been an honor to be welcomed. I've felt so alive in a world which negativity and destruction is sort of occupying our mind. So I would advise anyone listening, come to South Africa and you'll be so surprised.
No, the privilege, honestly, the privilege was all ours. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, that's our show. Yousuf said it best. The youth, the younger generation, they are our future. So let's invest in them. My name is Mohammed Ebrahim Tayob. You're watching Chat EbT. Until next time.